Hello, Isha Patnaik. How's it going?
It's going well. How about for you?
Good, good. Welcome to UXR Conversations, episode 6. Can you believe it?
Amazing.
Can't believe it. This is a special weekend episode. I'm not sure what that means. I'm just trying to get people even more excited. Um, and really glad you're here. We wanted to talk about research across domains in the sense that both you and I have worked in a bunch of different places that differ quite a bit from each other. And so we wanted to talk about that, our journeys, what the differences are between various workplaces where there's a great UX research team and what the experience is like. Before we get into that, if you have any questions or comments for us, you can ask them live on YouTube. So please send us your questions. I think it works on Twitter too. I'm not sure, but YouTube is best. And if you're watching on Facebook and you want to ask a question, I suggest you grant StreamYard permission to see your name at streamyard.com/Facebook. And again, we're going to be talking about this research across domains idea with Isha. So do you want to start us off by reminding, well, everyone and me, like how we even met, how we know each other? What's your recollection of how we even
How
met in
we
the first
met?
place?
Yeah, I was an intern at Airbnb the summer of 2016. I started in June, and I think maybe you also started in June of
Yep, yep,
2016. So
yep.
uh, I was like a short-term new hire, and you were an actual new hire. Everyone was very excited you were joining the team, and there was a lot of like commotion, and then you arrived, and it was great.
I do cause commotion. That's for sure. The truest part of what you just said. Did you have a great internship experience?
Yeah, it was super awesome. I was a product specialist intern, so I was on the product specialist side of the research team. So reading tickets and like doing qualitative analysis there, and then I got to work on Airbnb's first project involving wheelchair users, and I got to do my first like in-home interviews with wheelchair users, which was amazing. And I got to work with really awesome researchers at Airbnb, and it made me realize that that's what I wanted to do with my career after I graduated.
I think it's an interesting side of the Airbnb research team, the product specialist team within research. Can you explain to everyone who may not know what that means, what product specialists do, what researchers do, how it differs?
Yeah, totally. It's been a while, so I don't
Sure.
entirely remember, but I was reporting to Tony Gamboa, shout out, who taught me a lot about essentially what we did was we would go and pull customer support tickets related to a topic. So the first project I worked on was Airbnb Neighbors, which was how do we get people who are neighbors of Airbnb hosts to like feel heard and like be able to report specific complaints. So they built this product, and then what I did was I read like 200 or so tickets and did like qualitative coding on them, so categorizing them and then pulling out various themes. I didn't totally know what I was doing at the time. They were really helpful in coaching me through, and then reporting it out that way. It is different from the ways in which I've done user research since then, in the sense that we were using existing data, but not so different from how I code open ends from survey data today.
Yeah. And when you think back to that time, and when it comes to kind of research domains or research areas, did you have a favorite area, topic you wanted to research, companies you envisioned working for later on when you were earlier in your career? Or were you kind of undecided at that point?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think in college I worked at a lab for children's robotics, so we were trying to understand how to teach kids how to code. Um, and it was really fun, and I really loved the lab that I worked in. And I always thought I wanted to work in in education and educational research. And then I realized the things I spent my time on were related to media. So like I actually feel like now I've found the industry I was meant to work in, but I didn't know that at the time.
Coincidentally, my daughter just yesterday decided she wants to build a robot,
That's
and
awesome.
we made a robot sketch. Do you have any tips? This is kind of a side note, but let's,
Yeah.
just go there for a second. Any tips for children who want to build robots? What's the first thing we need to do? Because I know nothing about
Yeah.
building robots.
Me neither. I mean, yes and no. Well, I would say um, it depends. I think you can buy kits, or you can even buy like an Arduino
Hmm.
and like program it and then like decorate it and attach it to various things. I worked on like a very specific robot in college called Kibo, which was I think uh, like what we would do is send it to classrooms, and that was like the main way kids interacted with them. But that was like a pre-built robot that you programmed. I don't know. I actually have one of my very best friends is a robot ethicist slash educator, so I can have her follow up with you.
That's cool. That's cool.
Yeah,
Yeah, send me her email or something.
I will.
So let's both share a bit about where we have worked before we dive
Yeah.
deep. And I'll go first. So I started kind of in the UX realm back in Israel, and I worked on Israel's missile defense systems, which
Oh my gosh.
is quite different from the other roles I had. Um, and once we moved to the US, and after I went to grad school, I have worked for Airbnb, which is, of course, the travel space. It's also a marketplace, which is rather interesting. We can talk about that. And it's also the sort of product where so much of the experience is offline in the real world versus online.
Hmm.
I then worked for Intercom, and I think the biggest difference there was that it's a B2B company rather than consumer. And I'd love to talk about that a bit if you have that experience as well. And then
Yeah.
finally, these days, I'm at Wealthfront, which is a fintech company, and again a consumer company, very different from the other places I've been. So that's kind of just quickly going through the places and how they differed. How about you? Where have you been so far, and where are you right now?
Yeah. Oh, wow. I didn't know you worked in missile defense. I would love to talk more about that. But yeah, that's awesome. For me, I started out, my first job was at Jibo, which was a social robotics company. So we were bringing the world's first social robot into people's homes. And that was really interesting because I was right out of college. I had like no opinions on anything. And that's where I kind of learned how to blend like academic research and user research and learned on the job. Then after that, I went to Wayfair, which is the giant furniture online retailer. So kind of there was like both a supplier um, and the consumer side. I worked on the consumer side, and that was a really awesome experience. Like very large and talented design team. And now I work at Conde Nast, which is the company that owns publications like The New Yorker, Bon Appetit, Vanity Fair. So I work across all the publications in terms of doing like we have a product team that builds for every single publication, and then I also work on the kind of B2B side. I do research on our content management system that we've built in house. So some of my users are like our editors that work there. So kind of a B2B experience and also a consumer experience wrapped into one job.
What's your favorite Condé Nast brand or publication?
Oh, that's tough. Um, I I read the New Yorker the most, I would say, just because it's great. But Bon Appetit is awesome. I don't know if
Yes,
you've
that's my choice. That's my
yeah.
choice.
Yeah, cooking is really important, and the people who work there are really great, and across the company too. But yeah, do you watch the videos?
I sometimes.
Yeah.
Maybe more importantly, do you actually cook anything you see on Bon Appetit, or just look?
I do both. I would say I'm definitely I don't know if you know of, like, the different sub-brands, but there's this one called Basically, which, like, really breaks down how to cook things in, like, very
Okay.
step-by-step instructions, and I very much appreciate that, and I like to cook, um, but Bon Appetit recipes are both, like, very delicious and also very time-consuming, which I like. To an extent, it's busy.
Yum yum.
How about you?
So
Do you cook?
I'm doing my best. I'm
Yeah.
cooking a lot these days. Cooking a lot these days. No more free lunches. No more.
Yeah.
Thank you, Wealthfront, for all the food you give us. I appreciate it so much more now. Um, but anyway, back to the topic. Back to the
Yeah.
topic. So how do you have like a philosophy around these places you join, and why? Would you say your journey was intentional, not so intentional? For me, for example, I know that I absolutely did want and still want to experience various missions, various areas. I'm super happy to be experiencing financial technology. I think it's so foundational to everyone's lives. I'm super happy that I got to work in a B2B company and experience that as well, and serve tens of thousands of startups. Definitely happy about travel, which is something I love and miss dearly right now.
Yeah.
Um, and yes, I'm also happy that I got to work on a very important work back in Israel, in the missile defense space. How about you? Did you have an intention there to try out different things? Did it just kind of happen by chance?
Yeah, a little bit of both, I would say. So I'm also a comedian on the side. So I was in Boston
No.
for yeah, I've been doing it for a bunch of years. So I wanted to move to New York. That was like one of the reasons I moved here. Was because I was doing comedy in Boston and I loved it and I thought it was really great, but I wanted to also grow that part of my career. But with user research and just like my other, I guess I have two career paths. One, I think as a young idealist, I like want to do work that has social impact and like is foundational to people's lives. Um, but at Wayfair, I started to realize that one of my passions as a researcher is like, how do we provide guidance to people who need it? So at Wayfair, it's this huge catalog, and there are these people who are really trying to live their best lives through their homes. And like, I think that's something that a lot of us can relate to who are fortunate to have homes. And when I was doing research there, I worked on this team called Find, where we were trying to help people find the right item for them. And I like did this diary study where I followed these 10 people for a month and talked to them all the time. And I realized how little information they had. And that was when it like started to come together in my head that, oh, I want to work somewhere where the goal is to get people information that they need to proceed. And things like like when I was looking for a new job to move to New York, I was like, what are companies that can like demystify a certain like very complicated experience? So like looking into things like financial tech, but like especially media. Media is like very big in New York, and I thought it would be like a really good fit to work in something that I was really passionate about. Like I love really good journalism, and I think it had a combination of good journalism, social impact work, and also like giving people guidance and information they need to live their everyday lives. But yeah.
How do you define or think of social impact? Kind of, if I'm a researcher thinking about my next role, what does social impact mean to you, and where do you think those opportunities are right now?
Yeah, I think it can happen anywhere. I don't know. I think something like Wealthfront or something that allows you to do something that classically wasn't available to you is really interesting as a form of social impact or technology. I think the other thing is if it can hold some system of power accountable, I think that's good. And if it's if it's trying to change the world in a way to make it less evil, that's maybe how I would define social impact. How about
Yeah.
you?
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure if this covers social impact per se. I do think there are definitely things that are very foundational to people's lives, such as health, such as finance, such as social connection, which we are able to do in these times because of some amazing platforms out there. And I also think maybe this is where the social impact comes in, that traditionally or just a few years ago, people did not have access to many of these tools and these things. And so I'm a bit sick of this word that I'm about to say, I'm going to be honest, but any company service that's democratizing access to something that was very difficult to find a few years ago, that's a big deal. So better access to healthcare, better access to sophisticated financial tools, better access to travel and getting out of your bubble and experiencing the world, better access to good, fact-checked information and inspiration across many of Conde Nast's brands. All of those things are of incredible value to society. Plus, in the case of Conde Nast or journalism, definitely there's also the component of keeping things in check. So that's how I think of it, for sure. Um, we have a question. Let's take a moment here from
Yeah.
our most loyal viewer, world record holder in question asking on UXR Conversations so far, Tiana X. Thank you again for your question. What, in your experience, insights or advice you have for UX researchers working from home? A lot of companies are doing work from home and remote internships. I'm wondering if you have any advice on that. So, for the context, if people watch this afterwards, we are in a crazy, weird, difficult time, a global pandemic named COVID-19, coronavirus. We're all, if we're lucky enough to be working from home, if we can. And as a researcher, that's tough for many reasons. What's it been like for you doing research at Conde Nast, not from the office? Do you work in an office typically?
Yes, I do work in an office typically. Yeah, I think there are so many things that we can both lose and gain from working from home, primarily as a researcher. I mean, at least for me, one of the things that I love the most is just like putting up visual representations of research in the office, whether that's like printing out like a user journey that we put together after a series of interviews, or putting together like insights and like posting them around the office is something that we've been doing. Also, like just spontaneous conversations is something I feel like we're missing out on. I will say our team was really remote friendly before. We had a few remote employees, and they've been really helpful in like helping us transition and like giving us tips on how to like stay informed. We've still been doing team rituals like lunch and getting together and like coffee and stuff like that, which I think has been helpful for the social aspect of it, especially this is a really stressful time. We have like every week we have people like do a heart check-ins. Like a red heart is like you're not doing so well, yellow heart is you're doing okay, a green heart is you're doing pretty well. And we talk about that in our retros. I think on the research end, that's like all of the other stuff, but talking with participants, it is interesting. You don't get that same, like, oh, we're in the same room. Let's like walk to the, let's like walk on the way to the elevator together. So I think tips I have for conversing with participants is like keeping the environment casual, like leaving time to like have conversation that's not related to your research topic, acknowledging that this is a crazy time and talking about a like user testing or talking about a user interface like might be like a good distraction. But also like understanding where people are coming from. I think there's also an interesting inherent power dynamic in a lot of research. Like we do pay people to participate, and sometimes people like will do it because they're just doing it for the heck of it, or they really need the money. And just understanding that and being able to acknowledge that as well, especially during this time of like rampant unemployment. But yeah, I don't know. I think like be kind to each other.
Yeah,
It takes time.
I love that, and I really agree. I'm, for the record, on parental leave right now, so I'm not actually technically working in these crazy times. But I do have a couple of tips that are very similar to yours. I think number one is this is a great time for reflection and creativity and thinking about your practice, and that's a good thing to do that we don't often get to do in our regular day to day, especially if you have two career tracks like you do and you're just trying to do so many things. So this is a good time to think about the research practice in the organization you work for. The second thing, which you also mentioned, is communication. I would say over communication is really important, almost at a time like this, to stay connected and make sure that people are updated on what's going on and what you're up to. And then the third is indeed the social aspect. I think for those of us who do work in an office, day to day, and have lunch together and happy hours and other fun activities, it's very easy to kind of lose that when you're working remotely. I think it's really important to find creative ways to do that. I just saw yesterday, I had a chat with a researcher on the team at Wellfront, and he showed me this cool Figma where the whole team kind of added little tidbits and like fun things about the team. They kind of created this virtual space for jokes and fun things and kind of cool designs and little figures of us doing funny things and whatnot. It's a nice kind of creative way to stay together, stay involved with each other's lives and work and have some fun with it. So
Yeah.
that's my advice. Um, so going back to different research domains, I mean, how much of an impact do you even think it has on your day to day, on your research, working in these very different spaces? Kind of when you compare, say, life at Wayfair versus today at Conde Nast, how much does the experience differ because of the research domain? In this case, online retail versus publishing. Does it matter?
Yeah. I think yes, it does. I think I don't know. I think part of it is also the people who work at those places too. I think I guess I think like it is interesting to think about like how data can come together to tell different stories at different places. And at a place like Wayfair with like millions of products and millions of users and so many different things, like there is so many constant streams of data, and it is really easy like to use like only quantitative data to tell a story, and then like use qualitative to color that. I think in media, people like are used to like are drawn to the industry because they like qualitative stories, just like by virtue of how journalism is done. So it is cool to see like a different marriage of those things. I think like there are different marriages of qualitative and quantitative data in both domains. On the way that it impacts research, I mean, we're still driving some of the same things in media. Like we want to increase subscriptions, and it's similar to conversion rate. So how do we understand what is getting in the way of someone buying a sofa versus what is getting in the way of someone investing in a subscription in Wired? Like you can apply similar-ish methodologies there, but they have different resonance in people's lives. Like whereas media, you can like people are constantly being bombarded by media. People aren't always like top of. I guess people are constantly being bombarded by media that it's kind of like a habituated thing. So sometimes it's hard to get people to talk about it and think about it. Whereas with if you're furnishing your home, that could be like the number one thing on your mind. And so it definitely makes a difference with like how you recruit, who you're talking to, what people you put emphasis on, and but we're still trying to make money too to support our business.
I love that first point around the people you work with. When other researchers or people who want to get into research ask me kind of what's important to me, or one of those things is always the people I work with. But I never really reflected on the fact that the people you get to work with, it's partially a function of the type of company, the type of team. The people who choose to work in at Conde Nast or in publishing are probably different in certain ways than people who choose to work in travel or a bunch of other potential places they could have chosen. So that's a great point, and I kind of never really thought about it that way. Awesome. Do you think there's kind of a correct quote unquote progression between domains? Like, is there a certain domain or area that you should experience first before experiencing another? Um, should you start in B2C and then go to B2B? Should you start in something less foundational, move to the more foundational, or the other way around? Or is there kind of a correct way to do this, or is it really just dependent on other things? And if it is other things, then what do you think it is? Like, I wonder about that a lot.
Yeah, I would love to hear your take on this too. I don't know. I think when you're making career decisions, there are so many factors. I think if you can work somewhere you can care about, I think it's really helpful. I think that's like the most important way to career progress if you can. I think it is interesting. This is like my first experience of working in kind of both at the same time. Like I am working on the consumer side and on like a more B2B side at the same time. And it is interesting to switch contexts and I am learning a lot. Like my role at Conde is simultaneously an agency role and a like embedded product team role and a B2B role and a B2C role. And it is a lot of things happening at once. I don't know. I think I was when I first started, I was really hell bent on only working in consumer, and um, I think then my curiosity started to peak in what happens when someone is always using your product. Like, what happens when that so in B2B, like what happens when you have to when your product is like a blocker to someone doing their work well. Um, I was curious about that, which is part of the reason I was attracted to this role as well. But yeah, I don't know. I think wherever your curiosity lies at that point is a good way to guide yourself. I don't know that there's a rule, but I'm also pretty early on in my career and I can make pretty willy-nilly decisions and just go after it that way, which I feel fortunate for doing. But yeah, I don't know what your perspective on it is.
Yeah, I view things quite the same. I think we are fortunate right now in the research realm that our community is growing, research is appreciated. Many
Mm-hmm.
companies are either starting up a UX research team or growing it significantly. And so I think researchers or up and coming researchers have plenty of opportunities across all domains. And that may be the most important thing, given that fact, is to work somewhere where it aligns with your values and your interests. And those change over time. So I'm not sure you can really kind of predict, right? Like if I asked you now, whenever the time comes, where would you go? Would you stay in publishing? Would you go somewhere else? You tell me. But for me, the answer is I don't really know, because I don't really know what's going to be out there. And I'm not quite sure what I'll value. Things change in life quite a bit. So I think if you can find roles where there's alignment with your current way of thinking, that's obviously ideal. And I do think that's more possible today than ever before because of the opportunities that we have. So good news, I would say.
Yeah.
Um,
I
Yeah.
had this Uber driver 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, who also worked in construction, and I asked him why, like, what makes you want to work in construction, and he said, "Well, when I was a kid, I really liked to build things, and I thought if I loved that as a kid, I could probably love it for the rest of my life." And I that's something that I've been thinking about a lot too. Like at least for me, reading and writing were things that I loved as a kid, which is like why right now this job feels so right, and like being a comedian feels right, and writing in general feels right. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe I'm just using that as a way to justify things, but I have been thinking about that a lot.
So is there anything that we should have talked about but didn't? What do you think? Anything else about this topic of research areas, research domains, the differences between them? Anything else on your mind?
Yeah, I guess. Um, so you've worked in software, and I guess have you worked in hardware too with the missile defense system, or is there?
Um, well, I was working on the software side of a system
Mhm.
that has a hardware side. I've never worked on hardware. I actually find it fascinating. For example, if anyone's listening or will listen later on who works on, smart home systems, that sort of stuff, fascinated by those things and various gadgets. And I would love to have a chat about hardware with anyone who does that. But I haven't really had that experience yet.
Yeah, I will say I mean, I worked on the software part of hardware, but also I guess hardware itself. Um, but yeah, it is really interesting for smart home stuff to see how it like impacts their day-to-day life, which I think is the cool thing about it too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I will ask my producer, which is me, to to find someone who works on hardware and get them on this podcast, video cast, whatever we're calling it. We have another question from Tiana before we end. What would you say to yourself when you just started as a UX researcher? If you could go back in time, what would you say to yourself?
Me, um, I would say be human, I guess, which is kind of interesting because it is like such a human focused role. Um, but I think this is something that I've had to learn over the course of my career. But people have varied levels of understanding of the value of qualitative research. So I think it's just as important to do your work and do it well and in a valid and scientific way as it is to bring people along the journey with you. So like meet your stakeholders where they are, and bring them along this journey, and be okay with it taking a lot of time. Um, and yeah, I think as a young user researcher, you want to like exert the most influence as possible. And I think the way to do that is like be human, build relationships.
I love that. My advice would be um, that mentorship is key, and find great mentors and learn and absorb everything you can from them,
Yeah.
and don't, whatever the domain is, don't work at places where you don't have great mentorship, great coaching, people who are listening to you and advising you and helping you grow in your career. That's what really matters beyond any domain.
Yeah.
um I have one final question for you. I was going to say if, I'm not going to say if, I'm going to say when. When you have a Netflix special, a Netflix comedy special, what will the title be? What will it be called?
Oh gosh.
You must
Uh,
have thought about this because
I
you're on the track. You're on the track.
I'm not sure. I had this one woman show last year called Mother Tongue, which sounds like it would be about like sounds like it would be about like growing up brown in America or something. But it wasn't. It was totally about an embarrassing moment I had at my first job as a user researcher. It had nothing to do with it. So I guess I'm not sure yet. I haven't written the thing that I want to write that would go into a Netflix special, I guess. But Who knows? Maybe it'll be Isha Patnaik, user researcher at Conde Nast.
Well, when we go offline after this, we'll discuss this. I'm sure we can find something more exciting than that.
Do you have any ideas?
I'll think about it. I wasn't prepared to talk about that at all. I did not do my research properly. So I'll think about it. Hey, listen, thanks so much for coming on this thing and for chatting with me. It was super fun.
Thank you.
Quickly, quickly, if people want to reach out to you, what should they do that kind of for? What do you like to talk about with others, and how can people reach you if they want to?
Definitely. I would say I have my LinkedIn is slash my first name, last name. I also have a website and a contact form on my website, which is just www.ishapatnaik.com. I'm a lot more reliable on email than I am on LinkedIn, as Noam can probably tell you. But yeah, so feel free to reach out. I love to talk to researchers, especially ones who are early on in their career. So feel free.
That's awesome. And hey, if anyone is building hardware out there, doing research on hardware or anything else, honestly, because hey, we're all stuck at home anyway. Come talk to me. Let's have a UXR conversation. I'm at noamseg@gmail.com or at noamseg on the Twitter. Thank you so much, Isha. Have a lovely weekend. And we will catch you. Well, there's another conversation going on Monday, so get ready for that. More details to come soon. Bye for now, everyone. Have a lovely rest of the day.
Thank you so much. That's great.